Hi, this is Class 4 of Advanced Conducting for April 7th, 2020. Um, I will try to, if I don't live stream the class right at 1 o'clock on Tuesdays, I'll try to have it posted by 1 o'clock on Tuesdays. In this case, I'm recording it Monday night. I've already corrected all your homework. Everything looked great. You guys are doing a super job with Sing, Play, and Conduct. By this time, you should not be nearly as afraid of it as you were the first time you tried it on the first day of class. Um, you'll get better and better at it, and it'll start to make sense. And you will be sitting there in a choir rehearsal someday thanking me that I made you do it. So, though you probably aren't right now. Make sure you continue to check your email regularly. I may not send anything to you, but then again, if I do need to communicate with you, I'll probably do it through email. Thank you for videoing and sending in your assignments. They're coming through nicely, and you're positioning your recording devices, I assume it's your phones, in the right place so I can see and hear you really well. Let me know if this is working for you. I can shift things. I'm in a spare bedroom, and it's one of the few places I can come in the house, shut the door, and um, have some quiet so I can record. Let's see. Let me start this so that I keep track of where we are. Um, I mentioned changes in the syllabus last week. Just to recap a bit, research project and oral report. Your paper will be 2,000 words, 5 sources, and a 20-minute presentation with examples. And I prefer you to send that in separately so that we don't, I want you to be able to see each other's presentations, so we can't, it won't be part of the actual recorded class, because then that would trigger the copyright algorithms on YouTube. So I'm thinking probably just post it to Google. Best way to do it is to post it to Google and then share the link with everybody. I think we can do that. I'm not sure what the max amount of time is, but I think we can do that. So if there's an issue, we'll figure out something else. So maybe do Facebook, um, Facebook Live, and then we can do it in real time. Um, the final will be the last day of class. That's when I'll get it to you. And the research project and the oral report are both due on that last day of class, which is May 5th. If we do have to do it Facebook Live, then it'll be during the normal class period between 1 and 3:15 on that on Tuesday, May 5th. Otherwise, if we can send it in, we won't. I don't think we'll be locked into that time frame. Final will be due. I'll hand it to you on Tuesday, and or send it out on Tuesday, and then expect it back by Friday midnight on the 8th. A weekly essay. I loved your responses to the essay question, um, and we'll talk a little bit more about the essay for this week coming up here. Like I say, Sing, Play, and Conduct is going very well, and I am going to give you for this week Sing, Play, and Conduct. It's going to be in this hymnal. It's 260. I would imagine you have it in your hymnal, but it's Christ the Lord is risen today. So it's got some interesting leaps, some arpeggios, and some other stuff in there. So Christ the Lord is risen today will be your next Sing, Play, and Conduct assignment. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's see. I'd like to incorporate a new segment in this class, which is if we were if we were still meeting together um, in East Ed, much of the class is taken up with questions and feedback. I miss that. That's my favorite part of class is the dialogue. And so what I'd like to do is incorporate dialogue in this class. And the way we do that is if you would email me, if you have questions about something I'm talking about, if you're watching the video and what does he mean by that? Stop the video, go to email, and send me a question. And if you send me 5 or 6 or 7 emails, all with different questions, that's great. If you tell me otherwise, I will assume that I can answer them in the video for the next class, and so we can basically have a discussion, even though it's the lag time between the question and the answer might be a few days or a week. But what I'd like to do is have you, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and send those to me as you're watching the video. Don't wait till the end of the video. Do it as you watch it. Just stop the video, send me the question, and again, if you send me 5 or 6 or 7, we'll get them covered in the following class period. I'm assuming that if one of you has a question, both of you will want to know what the question is and know what the answer is. So um, I would love to tell you that I know everything there is about conducting. I don't. But if I don't know and I can't give you a good answer, I will look it up and find a good answer for you or tell you that I don't know. So we'll just add that in. So we'll just call it the Ask the Professor segment and questions or comments. And that's about as close as we're going to get to class discussion. So for next week, um, this would be due on the due dates are now classes normally on Tuesday, so your uh, due dates are going to be the Monday nights before the classes that the assignments are due for, and the deadline is midnight. Um, I uh, I will I am going to use a late penalty of 10% per day for late assignments. If you don't, if you aren't late with your assignments, I'm not going to be overly zealous in enforcing that. But if we start to get a drag on assignments, then I'm going to need to do that. It's important that you get your assignments in on time because I tried to grade them all together at the same time, and then it puts me in a position where I can talk about issues that I might see in how you're doing your assignments in the next video. So I know if I have your assignments by Monday night, midnight, as a matter of fact, in this case, I have all of your assignments all the way up through now, and they're all in by this afternoon, which is great. I mean, I prefer you not wait until Monday night, but if you can get them to me Monday afternoon, that'd be even better. But so here we are on Monday night. I already have all your assignments. I've corrected them, and I don't have to. Um, uh, I can tell you understand what's going on. I'm not having to clarify anything, and that makes it much easier for me to teach and correct. So, um, uh, die in the trenches, get it to me by midnight on Monday. I prefer by maybe mid afternoon on Monday, and that way I can record the class on Monday night. I can't record this class really until I don't want to record the class until I see your homework. If I have to, I will, but understand that I have, otherwise it gives me 2 classes that I have to record back to back on Tuesday, which makes for a very long day. And this way I can kind of spread things out between Monday and Tuesday. Okay, so your essay for next week. In 1993 and again in 1995, scientists at the University of California at Irvine found that college students who listened to a sonata by Mozart for a few minutes before taking a test did better than students who listened to no music or even music by another musician. Do you believe that music can make you more intelligent just by listening to it? Should teachers play Mozart sonatas whenever they give a test? So I've taken this question, I've incorporated it into the um, Canvas question of the week. So the essentially it's, do you believe that music can make you more intelligent just by listening to it? So 300 words, 300 word plus essay from you on that subject for next week. And maybe when you were growing up, you had Baby Mozart, because that was the kind of the rage there for a while. Listen to Mozart, and your child will grow up to be a genius. But I just want you to comment on that. Again, I want you to think about music, be able to articulate. It's not this isn't just about choral conducting. It is choral conducting, but the it's about teaching as a choral conductor, and so that's why I'm asking some of these education-like questions. Um, so that's your essay. Sing, play, and conduct. My choice of hymn, your choice of lines. Christ the Lord is risen today. In my hymnal, that doesn't matter, but Christ the Lord is risen today. I'm sure you have it in a hymnal someplace. I figured that'd be appropriate as Easter's coming up. I picked out the hymn. You get to pick out two lines, sing one of them, play the other one, and conduct. And since you see how I'm doing these things, you're probably going to expect that the following week I'll have you do the same hymn and have you switch lines. So you probably want to pick two lines that you can do and still, oh, shouldn't touch my face, right? Okay, so that you should uh, pick two lines knowing that the next two lines are going to be on the following week. So you might want to make sure that whatever it is that you're picking is you're not going to put yourself in a position where the following week it's next to impossible. Like you're trying to look at the soprano and play the bass. So I don't know, maybe that works for you. But um, so that is the assignment for Sing Play Conduct. Choral Score Reading Program. Both of you are caught up. You're doing great on those. Choral Score Reading Program. I'd like numbers 16 through 20 for next week, or the next five. I think it's 16 through 20, but it's the next five in the book. And again, I'm going to mention that don't get frustrated with Choral Score Reading Program. You're going to find that there are times when you don't hear something that the Choral Score Reading Program says that most folks do hear. And there's going to be times when you do hear something when the Choral Score Program says that it's not connecting with that. This is more about developing your ear. It's less about uh, thinking of music as being black and white, right and wrong. It's always there's a correct answer and there's an incorrect answer. You should know by now that music is not that crystal clear. It's not that clear cut. So there are going to be times when you hear a piece of music and you'll think it's too fast, and and somebody else may think it isn't. You may, and I've told this before, the last movement of the Messiah, um, Worthy as the Lamb. I've always conducted it at a tempo that you would expect from a Robert Shaw performance or one of the other standard performances of that, until I heard a recording of a European choir doing it and the conductor chose to do it at a much slower tempo, about 60% or about 2/3 the tempo that it's normally taken, and it really allowed the interplay of voices to emerge in a way that doesn't do it if you take it faster than that. So the last time I conducted it, I actually did the did that section in a nice, um, more of a maestoso kind of a tempo and performance, and it was really engaging for me. I enjoyed it, and I just enjoyed hearing it unfold. I don't know if the audience, I mean, people enjoyed it. I don't know that the audience understood the difference or even recognized it. But uh, it, it, there are times when we have those, we can take those kinds of liberties with music. So don't beat yourself up if it's not making a whole lot of sense to you. It will, as you continue to move through it, you'll start to sharpen your hearing in your ears, and that uh, choral score reading program will start to open up uh, kind of how you listen to music. So it's worth going through it. I think it's a wonderful program. Okay, and then finally next week, April 13, your research paper bibliography is due. So what I want you to do is, I should have your uh, uh, topic by, I'm supposed to have it by last night at midnight. So if I don't have your topic, make sure I get it ASAP. And next week, um, and if you look at Canvas, I broke it down so you can actually see the due dates on this. I added it in the last day or two so that you know, oh, okay, here are the assignments for the paper, and you should be able to. That should be in there and published. I'll have to check it. I think it's been published. So, but I'd like the bibliography again. That's 5 sources for this paper, and normally I would tell you that only 2 of them can be from the internet, but in this case, um, we have to go with what we can do. I prefer you to use primary sources on the internet, and I understand that you probably have to do all 5 sources from the internet. Primary sources are ideal. If you don't have a primary source, you can go to a secondary source. That is a source that is um, using primary source material, but you don't have access to that primary source. Make sure that you're citing the primary source as well as the secondary source that you're receiving that from, so that I can track the uh, the the bibliographic information, and make sure that you were on the same page with that. So I will grade you. That's part of the grading process, is your bibliography and what you choose and how well you incorporate that into your paper. So next week you're going to type up your bibliography. You can always add to it. You can always adjust it if you need to. But I expect to have at least 5 sources in bibliography in the proper Turabian form. Um, Submit that document to Canvas, and we'll go on from there. Okay, next week we will discuss the Green Book, chapters 4, 6, and 8. So we'll be doing chapters 4, 6, and 8 in the Green Book, and make sure that you read those. Okay. Got the essay, sing, play, and conduct, choral score reading program, research paper. Make sure you get me your research paper topic ASAP if you haven't already. Okay. I would like to very briefly, do a little metronome work. I will be expanding your metronome time frames and to as slow as 54 and as fast as I think 144. But right now, listen to this, and that's going to be 60, 90, 76, or 120. And this is your chance to hear it and tell me what it is. Okay. And that is 60. Okay. 60 we're going to change it. Tell me what this is. Okay. That is 90 beats a minute. I'm going to throw in a new one here. Okay, that's 54 beats a minute. This is that's probably the easiest one. That's 120 beats a minute. So that's just okay. This is a little faster. Tell me what this is. Okay, that is 144 beats a minute. A little tricky. That's 76 beats a minute. Eventually, I'll give you a string of maybe eight or nine different tempo markings, and then the way I grade that or score that is that you listen to the tempo, and you know it's going to be one of the eight. And if you nail it, you get full points, and if you get one that's close, if you get one that's on either side of it, I'll give partial credit, and then beyond that, I'd mark it wrong. So make sure that you're doing work with your metronome and that you are developing the rhythm as well as we don't just develop the ear in terms of pitch and timbre, but we also develop it in terms of rhythm. And internalizing rhythm, if you work with a metronome, what will happen is that you'll start to internalize a sense of rhythm so that you'll have what amounts to a metronome ticking away in your head when you're conducting. And when you get to that point and you've internalized the metronome or internalized the pulse, it makes it um, uh, it makes you a much more effective conductor and director. All right, get this back. Okay, be sure that you are still working on your International Phonetic Alphabet. We're going to stick with just vowels and just mostly American sounds that you'd be making. So if you're both singers, so you know there's a lot more to it than that. But for choir director, the two things: you want to be very proficient with IPA, and you want to make your choir very proficient with IPA, so that when you say, okay, choir, the vowel sound on that word is the ah, like in father. They can put the single symbol instead of having to write out AH or ah, like in father. All they have to do is put the symbol. It's like shorthand. Makes it much easier for you to prepare your scores, and it makes it much more efficient for your choir to take the markings down that you're giving them when you're in the rehearsal process. So you're going to want to teach IPA to your choir, just like if you're I mean, most school districts now are doing solfege, so you're going to want to do solfege also. So things that you want to learn if you don't know them already. Um, and again, if you work in the Lee Summit School District or some of the other school districts around here, you're expected to teach solfege to your choirs. So just be aware of that. All right. Talked about the bibliography being due on April 13th. The outline is due on the 20th, and the rough draft is due on the 28th. So just be aware of that, and you can start to file it away as you work on your paper. I've already given you the essay question, so let's get started here. Okay. In the book, I want to touch briefly on the chapters that I assigned for this week, which were the Eugene Ormandy article at the beginning, the preface, and then chapters 1 and 2. There isn't much I want to talk about. There isn't anything really I want to talk about with the preface, except for the section where they're talking about how the book was crafted and some of the issues there that they tried to address to make it more usable, and then some information about the people who assembled the book. But I would like to talk about Eugene Ormandy in that article that he wrote at the beginning of the book. Eugene Ormandy was a very well-known conductor of international status, brilliant conductor, and it makes sense that they would use an article that he wrote, that they had permission to include it in the book. A few things that I want to stress that he writes about in his paper. He says that the conductor functions on 3 levels, and those 3 levels are personal study, rehearsal, and performance. So the 3 things we have to do as conductors, whether choral or instrumental, is we need to focus on personal study, rehearsal, and performance. Personal study is that process by which we study a score so that we can hear the score in our minds. When I'm working on a score, working with a group, and going to teach them music, by the time I'm in the rehearsal process with them, I'm already hearing the music playing in my head. Matter of fact, sometimes, more often than not, I don't even have to try to hear it. I hear it playing over and over again. But I want to be able to internalize what that music sounds like, because if I can do that, then I know what I can do with the choir that I'm working with to get them to. I know what the standard is that we're aiming for, what they need to sound like. So you want to study the score so you can hear it in your mind. You need to understand scores in a historical context. If you don't understand the example I'm going to go back to that you'll hear me use over and over is Handel's Messiah. The opening is a French overture, instrumental. Bum, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. Okay, so that overture is a French overture, and Handel has written a dotted eighth and a 16th figure on dum, bum, 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 bum. That's what he's written, dotted eighth and 16th. But that's not the way it's performed. French overtures do double dotted eighths to 30 seconds. So what's written, what you see on the page is dum, 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 dum. And what you perform is dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. And if you don't know that that's the way a French overture is performed, and that composers in the Baroque used a form of shorthand so that they didn't have to put all the dots in and all the flags in. If you don't know that, then you can't do a proper performance of that French overture. Now, Messiah is loaded with that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, every piece of music expects you to have certain assumptions about it based on who wrote it, when it was written, and what genre it occurs in. Composers follow conventions about 95% of the time, and the other 5% of the time, they're uh, they're producing things that, especially if they're doing something that's new and hasn't been done before, they're trying to find a way to put that into uh, the musical language. And so you need to understand what Mozart was thinking when he was writing, what Beethoven was thinking, what Bach was thinking, Handel, so that you know the historic context of the music, so that when you are in reinterpreting that music for a modern audience, you can do it in a way that um, that shows understanding for what would have been expected at the time that the piece was written. That goes for every style period, every genre of music. You need to understand these things. So when we talk about personal study and understanding things within a historical context, that's why we take music theory. That's why we study. That's why I have as part of this class um, your listening assignment, where you're listening to 30 minutes of all of the major style periods and writing down the uh, the style characteristics of those types of that are being used for the time that the piece was written in. There, the learning process you should be a lifelong process. You want to continue to develop what you know about music. It makes you a better musician, and because of that, it will make you a better conductor. You also have to understand in your personal study. You have to understand um, the sound, the timbre, the intonation. Is this piece pre um, even tempered tuning? If it is pre even tempered tuning and it's a cappella, you're going to tune the choir differently than you're going to tune the choir if you're singing uh, a choral work that has orchestral accompaniment, because you have to tune it differently. Um, so you need to understand that there are different schools of intonation, and that they they occur that the seventh in a cappella music, in Renaissance a cappella music, is a higher pitch than the seventh in uh, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So you need to understand those things and be able to adjust your conducting accordingly. Um, you must understand the piece. The book says you are making music not for your own pleasure, but for the joy of your listeners. I can't stress that enough. We don't conduct for ourselves. Well, maybe we do. Maybe we conduct because we love to do it. But our job, just like a chef makes a gourmet meal, they're making that gourmet meal for the person that's going to eat it. They're not making it for themselves. They're not going to eat it. They're producing it for the pleasure of somebody else. That's what we do with our music. We produce it for the pleasure of someone else. As a music educator, you're producing it for the pleasure and edification of your students, and ultimately, then they're going to perform it, and then for the enjoyment and edification of the audience. Second of all, he says, so first is personal study, then he says rehearsal. Rehearsal is preparing the group technically and artistically, and it matches that which is what is in your head with what the group is doing or is capable of doing. Um, if you are working with the top musicians in the world, what's in your head and what's coming out of the group can be pretty close to the same thing. But when you're working with a junior high school choir or a high school choir, what you hear in your head and what you can get out of the high school choir or church choir may not align completely. And so part of this rehearsal process is matching what's in your head with what the group is doing and finding an acceptable common ground where you might say, well, you know, that particular section, the sopranos are just going to continue to blow it. Well, you can go back and fix it to a certain extent. Sometimes you have to rewrite the part. Sometimes you have to bring other singers who are more seasoned onto a part to get through the piece. Sometimes you have to find another piece, but um, your job is to match up the what you know to be what you want in your head with the capabilities and the production of what the group is doing. So, um, and then performance. Performance is where you immerse yourself totally in the music. You're doing that on an emotional level, and but you are also in performance instantaneously adjusting as as uh, the as the piece unfolds. So you're adjusting um, uh, as necessary to the performance space. Perhaps there's more reverb in it than in your rehearsal space. Um, Maybe it's cold. The temperature is cold, too cold or too hot. Um, having 1,000 or 2,000 people in a room watching the performance changes the dynamics, and those are all things that lighting can make a difference. Um, the and people can be the if you're going to do Messiah, let's say we do Messiah every 4 years at um, Calvary. Well, the group that it's the same group of people. If I do a Messiah dress rehearsal on Tuesday, and then I do a Messiah another dress rehearsal on Thursday, or maybe a rehearsal in space on Tuesday, a dress rehearsal on Thursday, and then do the performance on Friday. Even though it's the same people each night, the choir is different. People standing in front of other people to perform at a live performance in concert dress is a different animal than the previous night when they're standing there in jeans and they don't have the pressure of an actual performance. And so you have to be responding to all those things. You have to keep your head and your wits about you. And you're responding to those things because there are changes in the environment that are going to affect your performance. So you need to be able to immerse yourself musically in the work while also um, being able to adjust as needed instantaneously as the performance unfolds. So that's Eugene Ormandy. Great letter or great article, well worth reading if you haven't. Then I want to just touch briefly on chapters 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 says, So you want to be a conductor? It talks about committing yourself to success. I want to uh, confirm that. I want you to commit yourself to being a successful music educator. It's not just being a conductor, but being an educator. Uh, the impact that you can have on somebody's life as an educator is immense. People choose careers because of a single teacher took an interest in them and opened a love of whatever um, the discipline happens to be. It's a tremendous responsibility. It's a tremendous amount of power, and I would plead with you to take this seriously and commit yourself to being a successful teacher, and not just a successful teacher, but being a successful musician. The more success you have as a musician, the more success you'll have as a teacher. So the first thing is commit yourself to success. Um, Another point that the book makes is that your hands and your arms are your technique. The technique of a conductor is the movement of their hands and arms through time and space. your ability to control that and to do it in an expressive way determines your effectiveness as a conductor. So, musicianship is what your ears hear while you conduct. While your hands are moving through space, um, your ears are hearing and correcting and responding to what's going on in the room, and that is the core of musicianship. Uh, Another quote from the book is the music is in the sound, not in the printing. That is, the music doesn't happen. This is a page of music, and it is simply dots on a white page. But the music doesn't really happen until uh, you turn it into sound. And once you turn it into sound, um, you have music. All right. Continue to sharpen your tools. Your tools are your technique, which is your arms and your hands. Another tool is the knowledge that you have about music. Another tool is your ears, what you're hearing and how you're interpreting what you're hearing. Okay? So if you have those things, it will make you a competent conductor. Chapter 2 talks about basic time beating. That's all stuff that would have been covered in uh, basic conducting, basic time beating. You both do it, and you both do it quite well. Um, to be an excellent, I think a couple points to take from this chapter 2. To be an excellent conductor, you must be an excellent musician. Excellent conducting flows from excellent musicianship. So anything you do to improve yourself as a musician will, by nature of the art, will improve your conducting abilities. So file that away. Make sure that you continue to work on musicianship and understanding of music in general. The other point here is a quote from chapter 2. The art of conducting is the highest, most complete synthesis of all facets of the musical activity, and it should be so regarded by anyone dedicated to the profession. That is simply to say this: you are going to function at the highest levels of your musicianship when you are conducting. It doesn't happen any other place like it does when you're conducting. The highest calling, the highest you're reaching the peak or the mountain peak when you conduct. It pulls on everything that you're doing or everything that you know as a musician. There's nothing else that you're going to do as a musician that is as demanding nor as rewarding as conducting. And so that quote, the art of conducting in the highest is in the highest, most complete is the highest, most complete synthesis of all facets of the musical activity, and it should be regarded by anyone dedicated to the profession. All right, so that is my opening of the class. Do understand that we get to cover a lot more stuff in less time when there's no discussion. So discussion that would normally take up maybe half the class is absent. So I probably won't go 2 full hours. I don't know. Maybe I will. So, but I am going to take. I do have to pace myself. This is the second class I recorded today, and it's pushing 8 o'clock, and and my voice is running out of juice. So I'm going to take a brief 10-minute break here, and I'll be back in a second. All right, we continue our discussion. Um, the essay question is posted. If you check under assignments, it should be for week 4. It'll have the essay question actually as part of the assignment for next week. Also, when you won't know this till you watch the video, but when you go to pages and you come to this video that should be posted on that site shortly, you'll see a series of YouTube links to the recordings that I'm going to reference as we talk about um, choral sound. So be sure that you give those a listen. That's part of the class. So I'll probably run a little long tonight when you factor in those recordings, but I'm assuming that you'll find time to get all those in. So this is, and we may not be able to finish all this tonight, but we can at least get started on it. When I talked about, when I've talked about ears on a number of occasions, listening for developing ears that can hear mistakes, wrong pitches, wrong rhythms, ears that understand style, ears that are tuned into the balance between one section over another section, or an individual in a section versus other individuals in the section. There's another thing that your ears need to develop, and that is an aesthetic for timbre, or an aesthetic for sound with the group that you're working with. There are different schools of thought in terms of sound, what a choir should sound like. And we've talked already about a timbre in the voice and how overtones are the things that drive what a voice sounds like. So because of overtones, a dog sounds like a dog, a trumpet sounds like a trumpet, and a voice sounds like a voice. Your voice sounds like your voice, just like my voice sounds like my voice, and it is because of the overtones. If we strip the overtones out of sound, everything sounds alike. So it's those overtone pitches that, or harmonics, that determine what we sound like, what the timbre of something is. And it also determines vowel sounds. So what you hear as a vowel sound is actually a fundamental pitch with varying degrees of the proper harmonics above that pitch, varying strengths of each of the harmonics. So this harmonic might be stronger on an E, and that harmonic might be stronger on an Ah. But that is what we hear, harmonics. And that, and when you understand that, then you can use it to your advantage. So, styles of choral sound. There are 4 main styles that I want to talk about. And I'm going to mention them up front, refer to some of these as we continue to talk, and then point you in that direction so that you can understand what it is that you are trying to accomplish as a conductor. I have a certain aesthetic for choral sound. Within that aesthetic of choral sound, you can have a wide range of acceptable choral sounds, and you can also leave the range of acceptable choral sounds. There are bad choral sounds, and there are good choral sounds. I want to talk about the acceptable choral sounds. And my aesthetic for choral sounds are different than Mr. Shell's, Jeremy Shell's aesthetic. and his aesthetic is different than Dr. On's aesthetic, and uh, we've all developed our own aesthetics. Now they're all similar, they're all acceptable, and they're all within a range that one can say, yeah, that's a proper choral sound, but they aren't the same. So I listen for certain things, I want certain things from my choir, and just like Jeremy Shell does from his choir, they're just not the same. Some of it is, maybe 80 or 85% of it is, but there are certain things that I look for that he doesn't, and certain things he looks for that I don't. This is not a matter of right or wrong. It is a matter of aesthetics. It's a matter of taste. You may put a lot of salt on your food. I don't anymore. I used to, I don't anymore. Some people like it saltier, some people like it more plain. I like spicy food. You may not like spicy food. I love Indian food. My wife doesn't like it at all. So it's not that one is bad and one is good. It's that they're different, but they're both acceptable. So, styles of choral sound. The four main schools of sound in the US, and understand that these schools have, that the differences in these schools have um, migrated somewhat. They've be, style, musical style has become more homogenous as time goes on, and that's because of recordings and the internet and other things of that nature. But there are still four basic styles that you want to be aware of. There's more than that. We'll actually talk about six. But I'm interested in talking about four specifically right now. That's the Westminster choir sound. The Westminster choir sound can be described as dark and full and powerful. There is the St. Olaf choir sound. That's F. Melius Christiansen is the fella that started that back 100 and some years ago. Uh, uh, St. Olaf sound and the St. Olaf Choir School sound is St. Olaf College. And that sound is a straight tone, light, often described as European sound. The European sound is one of very light voices. Uh, they can get loud, but they don't tend to. They're not heavy. If you take the two extremes, it would be Westminster in terms of the darkest sound, and St. Olaf in terms of the lightest sound. Um, Timbre-wise, you're going to hear Westminster style groups are going to sing um, the big war horses, the big lots of singers, lots of instruments, lots of sound, power, kind of a visceral singing from the gut. That's all that Westminster stuff. On the other hand, St. Olaf is this straight tone, um, perfectly balanced, um, uh, indistinguishable voices. In a St. Olaf choir style of singing, the voices become one almost. There is a sense that they're so well matched that individual voices don't stand out. When I was directing Evidence, we used a St. Olaf sound. So if that helps you picture it, Evidence was St. Olaf all the way. I was in a St. Olaf choir when I was working on a master's. The university singers at New Mexico State, where I did my master's work, was a perfect example of St. Olaf sound. My undergraduate school, I was in a madrigal group, which was absolutely St. Olaf, and I was in the university singers there. That was at Illinois State, and that was um, a Robert Shaw sound, which is much more like a Westminster sound. Um, the university or the Calvary uh, chorale is whoever's conducting it develops or develops a choral sound for that group. Now you can have okay. Let me keep going here. Fred Waring. Fred Waring was a businessman. This is the third school of sound. And Fred Waring was a businessman that invented the blender. Okay? So Fred Waring invents the thing that you put the food in, you press the button, and it twirls around, and okay, that's a blender. Well, Fred Waring was also an amateur musician, so he loved choral music, and he was extremely wealthy because he invented the blender. So after he invented the blender, he took a bunch of money and started his own professional group. There for a while there was a group called the Blenders, and the group that he's most famous for is a group called the Pennsylvanians. Now, if you were 40 years older than you are right now, you would have heard the Pennsylvanians. And the Pennsylvanians would have been a group that they sang a lot of Christmas music at Christmas time and folk songs and um, popular arrangements, music from musicals. Uh, think Fred Waring would have been like 1940s, 1950s, and even though that music has, if you hear it, you'd recognize it, and you will hear it if you play some of the examples that I've incorporated that you'll find when you go to this video. Right under this video, on the pages page, there are the very choirs that I'm talking about, the very styles of music, and you can listen to those and get an idea of what these sounds actually sound like. So Fred Waring, even though the style is no longer performed for the most part, it's actually the closest thing to it would be like Glee, like Disney's Glee, or anything that Disney does. That's kind of the Fred Waring sound. But Fred Waring has a very distinct 1940s, 1950s sound because of the arrangement. But the sound is what you're going to hear with Disney Glee, or if you go to Disney World and you watch a Disney show, or if you do a musical. The musicals use the same Fred Waring stuff, which is all about intelligibility. So Fred Waring is not so much about dark or light, it's about understandability. And Fred Waring had, and you can look this up on the internet, look up tone syllables. And Fred Waring invented his own version of writing out words, not with the International Phonetic Alphabet, but with writing out words uh, phonetically, so that when you sang, you didn't sing the words on the page, you sang the phonetic breakdown um, uh, underneath the words. And a Fred Waring arrangement actually has that. So if you're doing, I'm wishing for what's it? I'm White Christmas. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. You'll have the text, and there is an I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, Fred Waring arrangement, and you have the text, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. And what you have underneath is then a line that goes to an M. I'm dreaming of a white, and it's all phonetically spelled out underneath. And when you sing it, you sing, I'm dreaming of a white, and you'll hear it in the recordings, the old Fred Waring recordings, where everything is so crisply pronounced that you understand everything that's being sung. You're not going to hear that in Westminster, and you're not going to hear that in Robert Shaw. Westminster and Robert Shaw are both darker, and there's much less concern about the actual consonants and sounds of the words, though Robert Shaw is easier to understand than Westminster. Westminster can get lost. It's just a wall of sound. But with Fred Waring, it's all about the words, and it sounds very American. When you hear it, they're singing English, but they're singing American English, and it sounds very American. This would be a good place to stop the video and listen to some Fred Waring. So, but what Fred Waring did was he developed, when all of this other stuff was going on, Westminster and St. Olaf, Fred Waring emerges as a conductor that says, I want a choir where you can understand every single word coming out of their mouth. And pop music and crooners and Frank Sinatra, and they're all kind of in that uh, uh, mindset. So as you listen to Fred Waring, it will sound very dated, but listen to how easy it is to understand the words. Then finally, the fourth, so we talked about Westminster, St. Olaf, Fred Waring, and now Robert Shaw. Robert Shaw was hired to take over the Atlantic Symphony Orchestra and Chorus. Robert Shaw was for an American when the world of classical music was dominated by Europeans, mostly Germans. Robert Shaw emerges on the horizon. It takes over the Atlantic Symphony Chorus and Orchestra and produces some of the most startlingly uh, musically incredible recordings of the 20th century. Robert Shaw was a brilliant musician. You can actually go onto YouTube and see him in rehearsal. He's a very plain guy. Um, he was he was he said what he meant. He was clear. He was concise. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he actually got fired for doing a lot of 20th century music because he loved 20th century music. So they fired him. People had a fit. They had to hire him back. So um, a lot of folk arrangements of American folk songs were produced by Robert Shaw and Alice Parker. I think Alice Parker may still be alive, but they produced a ton of arrangements. And it's hard to be a choral conductor and not end up doing some Robert Shaw, Alice Parker arrangements at some point. Robert Shaw's philosophy of tone was to hire professionally trained singers. Now, when he hired these professionally trained singers, he would have been hiring people who studied voice, people like you and like me, who were professionally trained singers, which would be um, people who would normally do recitals, oratory, um, uh, perhaps opera. That's the people he hired. And he had them, he didn't try to change their sound. He told people, he hired people that had trained voices, which had a nice full, if your voice is trained, you know how to breathe, you know how to open your mouth, you know how to properly form your vowel sounds. You create space in the back of your mouth and your head, so you have resonating space, and you have a much bigger sound than an untrained voice. That's the way it works. You understand this because you've had voice. Shaw wanted those voices. He placed those voices in his choir. And so instead of getting power from dark sounds, he got power from rich sounds. So the difference between Westminster and Robert Shaw, and they're going to sound more similar than they are different to you. But the big difference between Westminster and Robert Shaw is that the Westminster sound at its core is dark. The Robert Shaw sound at its core is rich. And it's a very American sounding, classically trained choir sound. My aesthetic is towards the Robert Shaw sound. I love the Robert Shaw sound, but I've been trained to do Robert Shaw and St. Olaf. I've been trained in both those styles. I can do a Westminster sound. I don't like that dark of a sound in a choir. Even Westminster, the current conductor of Westminster, doesn't do a true Westminster sound. The true Westminster sound, you'd have to go back to probably the 50s and the 40s to hear a recording of the Westminster sound as it was originally conceived to really understand what that is. When I was a choir student, when I was a music student, a choral student, um, 45 years ago, it was a lot easier to find Westminster sound, Westminster recordings than it is today. The Westminster recordings that I have connected to uh, your the Pages page in Canvas is the current Westminster within the last 10, 15, 20 years. So you're not going to hear the darkness that early Westminster choir had. But I did include a recording of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir still sounds a lot like the original Westminster sound. So if you can think Mormon Tabernacle with 400 voices or 300 voices in the Mormon Tabernacle, how many? That's what it sounds like. Singing in the big Mormon Tabernacle. I've been in that room, and it's acoustically amazing. It's an amazing room to sing in. And that sound is the kind of Westminster sound that I'm talking about. So, and in terms of current choirs, Mormon Tabernacle is probably the closest thing we have to a current, with even more so than the Westminster Choir School, which is a choir school. Westminster, the Westminster Choir today sounds more like Robert Shaw, and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir sounds more like Westminster did back in the days. So we have Westminster, which is a dark sound. We have St. Olaf, which is a straight toned, lighter European sound. We have Fred Waring, which is all about understanding the words. And we have Robert Shaw, which is the American, properly trained, classically trained voices, very rich sounding choir. What I'd like you to do now is press the pause button on this tape, go back to Canvas, and listen to all of the individual recordings that I've included that are listed directly under this video in Canvas. You go to Pages, you go to Video 4 or Class 4, which is what this is, and then the YouTube recordings are on there. You can just press them, click them, and watch them. As you listen to the sound of the choir. Okay, so I'm going to wait while you do that. And if you've done that, you're now back, and I think I'm going to stop there for tonight, because once you're done listening to all of those, it's going to run you about 2 hours. So let's stop there. We'll pick up from that point. Next week we'll talk about chapters 4, 6, and 8 in the Green Book. You should have your topic to me by now if you haven't already. Have your bibliography to me by the 13th, and then listen to these. Start listening to choirs with a sense of what is the aesthetic of this choir. What is the sound they're trying to emulate? even though nobody sounds like Fred Waring anymore, everybody was impacted by him because it was so easy to understand what people were singing. And and that's exactly what you get when you listen to Glee or you listen to a musical. So so go ahead and listen to that stuff, and we'll pick up where we left off next week. Have a good night. Email me your questions or your comments. Be safe. Um, and I'm praying for all of you and for this country and for the world. We live in a world that it's not perfect. So, um, but God still is in charge. So, I just pray for that you and your families are safe. And I will talk to you next week.